Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Travis Kimmel, Regional Agronomy Lead with Advanced Agrilytics. What I want to talk about this afternoon is handling your questions, which have been coming around, fungicide timing and overall fungicide management at this time of year. So the field that we're at today, this is a 110-day RM hybrid planted on April 27th. And this field has already had its first pass of fungicide applied to it. That would have been taking place back on July 8th. Today it's July 24th. And in this particular scenario, we're managing where we have fertility, both for phosphorus and potassium, above that assigned critical level on majority of the acres. And so as we've talked about over the years, this whole single timing of fungicide, and can an additional fungicide application actually extend that grainfill or actually add bushels? A lot of the work that we've done here over the last several years has really focused around stored carbohydrate reserve and how a plant wants to utilize that. Now, while we know that there's differences in how a plant wants to either utilize sucrose between R1 to R6, and there are differences. Some hybrids want to use a lot of that stored carbohydrate reserve to fill the year, and some of them want to hold it back a little bit. But as we think back to really that V6 vegetative dry matter accumulation and really overall plant mass at that growth stage, as we enter into rapid growth, that yield outcome or yield stability that comes with that increased plant size, i.e. increased carbohydrate available to that plant, ultimately drives more stable increased yield. And so as we think about this fungicide timing, it's going to be a little bit different for each one of you, and it all depends on where you're at from a really fertility standpoint. For those of you that we are running this multiple pass application, we're really targeting that late vegetative time frame, starting at say V10, V12, V13 in that window of application, because what we're trying to do is build more sucrose content in that plant in that 2 to 3 weeks prior to tassel, so that when we get to the growth stage that we're in now in this field, it's very hot today, as much as across the Midwest. Lack of rainfall in a lot of areas and really high daytime temperatures, as well as these mid 70-degree nighttime temperatures, are driving that increased respiration rate of that plant. And so one of the ways to help mitigate against that dark respiration or burn off of that stored carbohydrate that plant is using, that early application can help increase that overall sucrose content, specifically when using a strobilurin chemistry, that you're slowing that nighttime respiration, or dark respiration as we refer to, i.e. you're increasing really that overall sucrose content available to that plant as we progress through the growth stages. So in the field today, like I stated, this has been sprayed a couple weeks ago. We will be coming back here in the next 10 plus days for that second application that will be timed at that time, brown silk or that blister stage. And so what I've done here is I've actually collected 2 different plants, and you heard me talk about fertility management. This plant here, and then I have 2 plants here, plant represented here on the right, and this plant here on the left, were taken from where phosphorus is above critical level, but the difference here is soil potassium. The plant here on the right, much smaller diameter of plant. We're about 50 parts per million below the critical level. And as you can see here, as I've split these stalks, there's a clear difference in overall stalk diameter. But then also what I want to direct your attention to is really these first 3 internodes here above the soil line. And so, as you know, I have this split in this cross section. You can see here we have essentially node 5 here. You have internode 6 here that is stacked quite tight, internode 7 and internode 8. Here on this plant over here to the right, you have essentially internode 6 here, which again, small stacked node, internode 7 and internode 8. And you can see as you look at this stalk, essentially that styrofoam nature of that pith of that stalk. This is dry to the touch, whereas here, as you're looking at internode 8 on this larger plant, we do have some utilization or remobilization of that stored carbohydrate, and even reaching down into internode 7 here we have a little bit as well. But again, it's still wet to the touch. Clear stalk size difference. We have more carbohydrate essentially available to that plant as we've built that larger stalk diameter. And then of course a represented difference here, as I took these off the top of these plants, you can see that overall diameter difference. So in these cases, as you start to think about how you want to manage or invest these dollars in fungicide, a plant over here where we aren't too critical level, we know we don't have the stalk size, we aren't going to have quite that yield potential. You also have to understand the difference. I'm going to say what the risk is, because this plant is going to be utilizing what little that it does have to give to that ear. And so in some of these cases where we're at today with these really high temperatures, the restoration rate on this plant is really, well, on both of these, is quite a bit higher, but you have less to pull from on this plant. So in some of these cases, you think about from a broader perspective, and I'm talking subfield environment right now with where I pulled these plants from, but as you think about this from a broader scope, a lot of your acres, higher percentage that we don't have fertility taken care of, that fungicide application, or really in this case of a dual application, may not be cost effective, and likely in most cases it's not going to be. So then you want to start to time really a single application. And so there's a lot of university research out there, as well as industry research, really in and around that silking to brown silk time frame, which is quite common. And then you're really timing it around, I'm going to say, disease pressure, and you're trying to protect that plant against disease. And so remember, as we think about the corn plant as it starts to enter into those reproductive phases, building carbohydrate, 2/3 of that is going to come through photosynthesis. And majority of that, as we think about leaf longevity, is going to come from essentially the ear leaf up on that plant. That last third's coming from stored carbohydrate. And so the longer we keep a clean leaf surface, absence of disease, and we can help mitigate or slow that nighttime respiration, the better off that we're going to be, reducing kernel abortion and really premature death from other sorts of diseases as we think about how to manage through this. So there's no clear-cut answer for every single acre, but again, working with myself, other members of our team, helping manage around that fertility, that helps make that fungicide decision timing, as well as taking really the emotion out of when is the absolute right time to make that pass.